Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Andrea. It's nice to have you guys back here. This is the final day of back to school week, which is actually 8 days because I started on a Tuesday and I'm ending on a Tuesday. So yeah, you guys have been really receptive to these videos. Thank you so much. Some of you have been watching and you're not in college, and I know the videos don't really apply to you, but you've been watching them anyway. Thank you. That is really nice. Today, I started filming another video. It didn't seem that important, and I was kind of all over the place. And I think the thing that I really want to talk about is addressing grad students, PhD students primarily, but it would apply to master's programs and just grad school in general, especially if it's, but I think this metaphor that I'm about to get into applies to undergrad, so just college in general. And you can take it and apply it to whatever your degree program is. I'm a bit of a documentary nerd, and a couple documentaries that I've watched that really stood out to me were documentaries on climbing K2 and Everest in the Himalayas. If I'm remembering this correctly, Everest is the tallest, but K2 is the slightly more technically challenging as a climber. We could probably say that a master's degree is like Everest and a PhD is like K2. Maybe we'll run with that. But as I've gotten through my PhD program, and as I've said before, I'm now starting my 4th year. I'm preparing for my comp exam. As I've been going through this, I think one thing that people will tell you as advice for grad school is that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that you should pace yourself. And that's definitely true. But if we're going with kind of sports or extreme sports kind of metaphors and analogies, I'm not sure marathon is really the best one. Because a marathon, at least to me, implies a steady path. And to me, grad school is a steady climb. But I really like my Everest and K2 metaphor, so I'm going to stick with that, and I'm going to explain that today. The reason I think a PhD program is like climbing K2 or Everest, I mean the process is kind of the same, is there is a process to doing it. And if you've watched, I'll try to leave the titles of the documentaries, especially if they're still on Netflix, in the description bar so you can check them out, is because there's a process to climbing it. You don't just go to the mountain and climb it, especially when you're dealing with mountains like K2 and Mount Everest, because they are so technically challenging, and it's not like I would die halfway there. And there goes my air conditioning. We're just gonna run with it. When climbers decide to do something like Everest, they have to fly to I'm trying to remember the videos. They've got to fly to the nearest airport, which is not close. I think in one video they fly to Pakistan. That sounds wrong to me. I'll put in a title or something down below. But so they've got to fly to the general region. And then there's usually like a 2-day drive to get to base camp. And so to me, your undergraduate degree is that flight to the general region. And then your master's degree is kind of that 2-day drive to base camp. And then once you get to base camp, that's kind of like your first year of your PhD program. So when they get to base camp, they usually spend a couple days setting up base camp, getting adjusted to that altitude difference, kind of hiking around the general area, and then they start climbing up to the different camps. So K2, I think, has 4 camps besides base camp, and then there's the summit. You spend some time at base camp, and then you start hiking up to camp 1, and then usually they go up to camp 1, they turn around, they come straight back down, because they've got to get acclimated to the altitude difference and to there being less oxygen and all that fun stuff. So then they'll hike up to camp 1 and they'll spend the night at camp 1 and then hike back down to base camp. And then they start going from camp 1 to camp 2, and it's the same process. They go to camp 2, they turn straight around, they come back down. Then they go up to camp 2, they spend a night, come back down to camp 1. And so there's this constant process until they finally get up to camp 4, and they can spend a few days there because you don't want to attempt the summit until you're ready. And here's where we really get to the grad school analogy. So to me, all of these different camps are different stages. So there's your first year of coursework, and then there's your second year of coursework, and then there's completing all your coursework and doing your portfolio papers, or that's a requirement at my program. Every program is going to have different requirements. You've got all these steps, and that's every time you check one off, that's kind of like getting to another one of those camps partway up the mountain. I now feel like I'm hanging out at Camp 4. The summit is just up and like slightly out of view, but it's there, and I know it's there, and I just have to pass my comps and my colloquy and get my ABD status, and then I can start attempting the summit. That is its whole process. Some climbers, they start, and then the weather changes really quick, and they've got to go back down to Camp 4, and then they wait. Some people get stalled. They get stuck at Camp 4 for a few days because they can't hike all the way back down to base camp, but the weather's not right to attempt the summit, so they just kind of hang out. Some people make it all the way up to Camp 4 and they never summit, and I think those are like the people that make it really far in and then don't graduate. They quit their program, and that does happen. Despite all your best intentions, sometimes you don't finish, and that can be for a number of different reasons. And I think it's important that if that does happen to you, just like if someone manages to make it all the way up to Camp 4 and they just don't get to the summit, you've still done something that the vast majority of people haven't done. And so you shouldn't feel bad if you do have to quit. That's something I don't really have a lot of advice because it's not really something that applies to me, but I would think that if you get partway through the PhD program and you decide for whatever reasons you have that you're not going to continue, there is absolutely no shame in that because you've still gone further than most people will go. So for me right now, I'm kind of hanging out in this Camp 4 and just waiting for the conditions to be right, waiting for me to pass my comps and get ABD, and then I can start working on the summit. I think that last bit, and when you listen to the interviews with the climbers, they'll say that it's that last bit from the final camp up to the summit that is the hardest part. You've made it all that way, but there are so many people that abandon it at that stage and never make it to the summit. And there are so many things that can go wrong in that last bit. But you do finally get to that point where you can see the end. I think once you are down to just the dissertation, it's still a monumental task. And I've heard grad students, and I've heard them say, I just have the dissertation left, as if it's so easy to just check that box off. And it's not. It's really, really difficult. Just like that last stretch of K2 or Everest is like the hardest part and the most treacherous, and where a lot of accidents tend to happen. It's something that you have to really be paying attention to and make sure that you are going through that dissertation process in the best and most effective way that you can, and that you make it to the top, and then that you make it successfully down. Because finishing your dissertation and getting to the summit, getting to the top of Mount PhD, isn't completely the end. Just like when they climb Everest or K2, at some point you turn around and you hike back down. Maybe that's the job market. I don't know. I haven't gotten to that point. But, it's still, there's still stuff you have to do in terms of getting everything formatted and getting everything submitted and then defending your dissertation. And that's kind of formality, and that's kind of, I think that's where, when they're hiking back down the mountain, they kind of know where the problem spots are. They're prepared for the descent. It is much faster because they can just keep going. They don't have to stop at each of the camps along the way. But it's still not without its risk, and you still have to make sure that you are doing everything that your graduate college wants you to do, and that you actually do make it to graduation, because finishing your dissertation seems like the final step, but there are actually a bunch of little bureaucratic steps that you have to go through. So I think for someone coming into grad school, having And you can create your own analogy. For me, K2 and Everest is just what really works, because it's a great visual representation that there is a path, and it is established. When you watch these documentaries, they talk about how there are a few different approaches that climbers can take, and they all have their drawbacks and their risks and stuff, but there's still a path that has been determined, and there are stops along the way and things you have to kind of do, so you don't just attempt to go from base camp to the summit all in one go. You don't attempt to go from your first year of your PhD to your dissertation in one go. You've got all those kind of stops along the way that you have to go through. Finding a good metaphor or a way of visualizing your program and your degree path in a way that helps you see all the steps and helps you celebrate every time you've reached one of those milestones is a really good idea. Because I think when you get to your dissertation, and from what I've heard from people who've gone through that process, you've gotten so far, but the dissertation is a beast. And I think it can be I would imagine that it can be very easy to forget how far you've come, just as I would think that for climbers, they get to that final camp before the summit, and the summit still feels like it's just so massive and out of reach. But if you look back, you've already come so far just to get there. So finding ways, I just think finding a metaphor like that will help you track your progress and see what steps you still have left, but also how far you've come is really important. But yeah, so just thought I'd share that. Maybe it will help some of you, I don't know. If you have your own metaphor that you've come up with, I would love to hear it, because I love hearing these kinds of things, how other people kind of visualize themselves in their program. I think this analogy would also still work for undergrads, because you've got your freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year. You might have some different steps along the way according to your major. There might be an internship that you have to do. So it definitely applies. You can kind of adapt it to whatever degree that you're in, but this is kind of how I'm visualizing myself getting through my PhD. So this concludes back to school week. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I've been really bad about doing the whole typical YouTube spiel about thumbs up, comments, subscribe if you're not subscribed. I've got some fun stuff coming up, so I definitely would recommend subscribing, because hey, why not? And yeah, I will see you all in the next video. Talk to y'all later.